Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's episode of Roundabout Sports presented by Interstate 70 Sports Media, where our passion is our profession. Folks, it is Wednesday, April 16th, 2025. It is a beautiful day out here in the St. Louis area. I'm the maestro, Jeremy Karp. We got a fun show for you today here on Roundabout Sports. First off, I do want to say you can check out Roundabout Sports on Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Pocket Cast, and anywhere else you stream your podcasts. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, X, and on our Interstate 70 Sports Media YouTube channel. And speaking of streaming podcasts, be sure to check out the Other Guys Sports Podcast, Issues with Wrestling with Christopher Miles and Jared Shannon, and of course, the Blues Fan Forum podcast. And speaking of the Blues Fan Forum podcast, which is the flagship blues show of Interstate 70 Sports Media and very well sponsored and advertised, I have the pleasure of having on my friend and one of the hosts of the show, Jacob Steve, here on this evening because, well, some big news happened for the Blues yesterday. Jacob, come on in here. Tell us a little bit about what we are celebrating here in St. Louis.
After 2 whole years or 2 NHL seasons, the Blues are finally back in the playoffs, and it is now officially a good time to be a Blues fan. When the last couple of years it hasn't been as great.
No, it has not been fun at all these past couple seasons. And heading into this season, it looked like we were going to have a third just bad season. Bannister gets fired. In comes Jim Montgomery, who had just gotten fired by the Bruins. And what's interesting to me is in the second half of the season, out of a possible 50 points the Blues could have gotten, they got 40. Like an unbelievable second half turnaround, Jacob. What do you make of this team since the Four Nations face-off?
It's been a new team since the Four Nations face-off, but even just under Jim Montgomery since he's taken over, it's been a new team. The identity since the Four Nations face-off finally clicked. You can see that the team is just pressing more. They're more confident in their abilities. They're playing a lot more hockey in the offensive zone instead of the defensive zone. The things that made us bad in the past are what other teams now are having problems with against us. We were always like, oh, we're getting in the offensive zone and we're getting one shot and then we're out. And now we're not doing that, but teams that we play, we're making sure that that's happening to them. So it's been almost, they were so bad at the beginning of the year. So it's been a complete 360.
Well, one thing I noticed about this, all right, a lot of people have drawn parallels, and it's expected, between this team and the 2019 Stanley Cup champion Blues. And there's a lot of reasons why. Second half surge of success. A new coach comes in and leads the team after the other coach, doesn't do so hot. But for me, there's one glaring difference between the 2019 team and this 2024-25 team, and that's size. The team in 2019 that won the Cup was a lot bigger, and you can be physical in multiple ways when playing hockey. And while they were physical in size, I feel like this Blues team is scrappier, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that 2019 team was built to destroy teams in what was kind of called a death by 1,000 cuts idea. So they were just going to hit and hit and hit and hit and hit until that team just fell apart, which is exactly what happened in 2019 when we played the San Jose Sharks. Game 6, they were missing many of their star players. Game 6 almost wasn't even a playoff game against the Sharks. This team is a lot smaller, and I think one person who perfectly describes what you were just saying is Nathan Walker, one of the smallest people on the team, but now has the franchise record for hits in a season.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about, Nathan Walker, 5'9", 186. So when you talk about franchise record for most hits in a season, I mean, we're just going to put, and, you know, I get it. He's a center, but I'm going to throw just a player from the 2019 team out there who's also a center. Let's go to Ryan O'Reilly. 6'1", 216. I mean, a glaring difference in height and in weight, but Nathan
And
Walker
really not much of a
definitely.
hitter is Ryan O'Reilly.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing, though. You know, like I said, for size, what this team lacks in size, they do make up for in kind of just the scrappy physicality, the never back down physicality. The Blues, and I'm not saying that, and obviously this is an interesting way to say it. You could almost say the 2019 Blues were more bullies in the sense of being able to physically, you know, just dominate in the hits department, whereas these guys not so much, you know, but they're still extremely physical.
Yeah, I don't think that 2019 team was built to ever sweep another team. Like that team was built to go 6 or 7 games and win it in that 6th or 7th game because they just bruised the other team. Where this St. Louis Blues team has the skill in order they could, you know, come up and sweep a team. It would be a surprise just because of how the early season started. You're like, well, the Blues aren't that good. They're the wild card 2 team. But if you look at the most recent games, like the 12-game win streak, I mean, if we can wrap out 12 games in a row, I think we can win 4.
Absolutely. So I wanted to ask you about this. There's a player on the team. You know, you had revealed earlier. You know, Robert Thomas did get hurt last night in the win against Utah, but it was a precautionary measure to keep him out of the game. They said he probably could have returned, but why risk it? Especially when, you know, the Blues won 6-1 and they were already up 4-1 at the time of his injury. So there's no sense putting him back in. What do you make of, as we head into the playoffs, Robert Thomas's regular season?
He's already established himself now, I think, as one of the elite centers in the league. I'd say for probably the past maybe even 2 to 3 years, he's been that underrated guy. Like if you ever ask, like, who's an underrated player, it's Robert Thomas. And I don't think Robert Thomas is that underrated player anymore. I think people understand just how good he is and where he should fit in the ranks of, you know, some of the best players in the NHL. I think he finished the season on a 12-game point streak. So, I mean, he's been on fire and really leading this team. If you ask Dakota, my other co-host, Robert Thomas is the guy that should be wearing the C on his chest and not Braden Shen.
Ooh. You know, it's interesting. And I got oh, well, so I wanted to sports. So my Aunt Barbara's tuning in from Florida. She says she knows JB Forbes. Now, we're going to have JB Forbes on in just a few minutes. Before we have JB on, there's something I wanted to talk to you about, Jacob, and with the Blues. And, you know, you talk about kind of Blues players and the expectations and kind of where we're at with this team. Can I just say there came a point where, I mean, you know, Jordan Kyrou, it looked like the big 8-year contract that he signed with the Blues really was going to backfire. And a lot of people didn't like it. And here he comes this season, has a career year, 36 goals, 34 assists, 70 total points, which puts him in the top 45 in the league of all players. And he's in the top 30 in plus minus with 23. Like, you know, even last night in the playoff clinching win, he got 2 goals, and you know, I'm actually very amazed by Jordan Kyrou. I really am. What do you make of the season that he's had when people, I think the biggest thing was people thought he was going to be traded before the deadline?
I think the big thing that's helped Jordan Kyrou is, one, his ability to kind of fix his defensive game. People in the past blamed him for being offense only and not providing any defense. And I think you've seen a lot more back checking from Jordan Kyrou, especially in the offensive zone, just ways to steal the puck so that way we can get a second chance on net instead of just that one and done that we talked about. But I think the other big one is Dylan Holloway. And Jordan Kyrou found his forever partner on a line. So Robert Thomas and Pavel Buchnevich has always been those guys that are like partners. And even when at the end of last season, the beginning of this season, when we were moving Buchnevich to center, it was like, why? Because we need him paired with Robert Thomas. Like, that chemistry is there. And I think Jordan Kyrou has now found that chemistry with Dylan Holloway. So that is just a huge bump, which is why you see, one, Dylan Holloway's breakout for this year, but also Jordan Kyrou's just fantastic season, scoring all the points that we expect him to do. But like you mentioned, that plus minus and seeing his plus in the top 30 in the league. And I believe first on the Blues. I know Bolduc was up there too, but I don't know who ended up as the best plus minus on the team. But yeah, just an excellent season for Jordan Kyrou this year.
It really was. It amazed me. And I'm glad that, in a way, I didn't know how he'd do this year. So it's great to see that being proved wrong, on the positive note. So I wanted to ask before, I let you go, because I love having you on. I want to have you on again. Why not? Because you're the official Blues podcast of Interstate 70 Sports Media. Tell us a bit about the show, where everybody can find you and Dakota. And I know you just had episode 115 come out, so a little bit about that.
Yeah, so episode 115 just came out actually this morning, 6 a.m. So it is fresh. It was recorded on Monday, though, so it was recorded before Tuesday's game. I have a general idea what it was about, but unfortunately that was one I didn't get to catch, or I didn't get to be a part of, because I'm doing other things. I'm a special education teacher and working on some other stuff outside of, or related to school. So I wasn't able to work on that one. But Dakota had his brother-in-law on as our guest, and they talked a lot. I mean, they talked about the Blues playoffs chances, what it was going to look like if we played Winnipeg. Went over kind of some end-of-year team superlatives, as well as a possible MVP for the team. So kind of just went over a full recap of the team, plus a little look forward on the playoffs. So you guys can find that episode 115 and all of the other episodes on Spotify, Amazon, or Apple. And then we are big on the social media on Facebook, but we do have Instagram and X as well. I want to call it Twitter, but X, I guess.
I still want to, I went so long, I still called it Twitter, and sometimes I still do. Well, Jacob, thank you so much, my friend. Thank you for everything you've done, everything you and Dakota do. And I look forward to talking to you guys soon. Okay?
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Jeremy.
All right, Jacob from the Blues Fan Forum podcast here on Roundabout Sports, presented by Interstate 70 Sports Media. Absolute blast having Jacob on. And folks, it is now time to introduce our featured guest for the evening. And that is, he's a legend in the St. Louis. He's a legend in the photojournalism world, so much so that he's in the Missouri Photojournalism Hall of Fame. Now, I want to make something clear here. Photojournalism, some people think it is an art, or rather art photography. Now, sometimes there's a vigor to photojournalism that's just tough to beat. There's always significance to it. I was a minor photojournalist in photojournalism. My main thing is writing and broadcasting. But I had the pleasure of learning under Matthew Schott, fantastic photojournalist in his own right, a huge part of my life and career. And what's interesting, though, with photography, you come away from it with your feathers flustered, feeling like you've been jostled by human contact and touched by the energy of the photo. And this is a gentleman that emphasizes that oh so much. Ladies and gentlemen, he was a lead photo journalist at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch for 45 years, up until his retirement just 5 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, here on Roundabout Sports, the one and only J.B. Forbes.
Thank you, Jeremy, for having me on.
Thank you for being on, JB. It's a great pleasure. And like I said, yeah, my aunt told me that she actually used to work with your wife, Debbie. And my aunt was is a retired nurse now.
Oh, really?
So yeah. So I always love that interesting connection there. But first, I have to ask, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing pretty well. Enjoying retirement, and sometimes of late I've been saying I need to go back to work so I can rest.
Yeah. Rest seems pretty good sometimes. Now, I told you so later on in the show, after our break and everything, I'm going to showcase some of the pictures that you've taken over your career. Like I said, because I could not do justice in 45 minutes, your 45-year plus career. It's just a select few. And there's going to be many more down the line in future episodes if you like me enough to be back on the show. Because I'd love to have you back on. But first thing I want to ask you is, I talked about the vibrancy and the energy that you feel when you take photos, especially specific events. What drew you to wanting to become a photojournalist?
I got started in photojournalism almost accidentally right from high school when I was the sports editor of the high school paper, and I was also running on the cross country team, and our cross country team was winning every race, and football was losing every game. So the teacher said, "Go ahead and do the page the way you want." So I ran big headlines across the top about cross country and little headlines at the bottom about our football team losing. The trouble was I was writing stories about myself, which is a no-no. And but the instructor said keep going, so I did. And I because our team ended up winning state, I got a small scholarship to a small college in Nebraska, and I ran pretty well that year. And I thought I was pretty good, and I was also homesick, so I transferred back to KU for two reasons: because it was closer to home, Prairie Village, Kansas, and because I wanted to run with a hero, a guy named Jim Ryan. And that's a name that's getting further back in history, and I mention it to people now, and I get blank looks, but he was just a great high school runner, broke the 4-minute mile, first one to do that, ran the Olympics, and it was just a star runner, and I wanted to say that I ran with him. So I got on the team, the KU track team, and I actually crossed ball. And he had a late class, so we would be coming in from practice after running many miles, and he'd say, "Does anybody want to run with me? I'm going to run just 6-7 easy miles around town." And I'd go, "Sure, I will, Jim." Even though I was worn out, but I wanted to be with this guy that was my hero. So he and I went out and ran the streets of Lawrence, Kansas, and I got him to talk about his major, his life, his major, and he was majoring in photojournalism. And eventually I got him to take me up to the William Allen White School of Journalism. He introduced me to the professors there. Then I got him to take me up to Topeka, Kansas, where he was working part-time as a photojournalist for the Topeka Capital Journal. And at the end of that sophomore year, I realized that I was way out of my league running, nearly as good as some of the world-class runners that were running on the team. So I quit at the end of the season rather dramatically in the middle of a 3-mile race, but that's a different story. And went back to the William Allen White School of Journalism and said, "Hey, remember me? I'm Jim Ryan's friend. Can I sign up for photojournalism?" They said, "Sure." And so I took the classes, did well, started entering student contests with my photos. They did well. So then I thought, hey, this is moving right along. So I went to Topeka, where Ryan had worked, said, remember me? I'm Jim Ryan's friend. I'm looking for a job. Here's my portfolio. And the editor looked at it, and I could tell he wasn't terribly excited. And he said, I do have a place for you here. If you'd like it, I need a lab boy, which wasn't what I had in mind, but I took it and learned more working as a lab assistant to some great photographers than I ever did in school. I say that. I hope KU people aren't listening, but I learned a whole lot. And after I worked there for a while, the editor let me continue going to school, and I finished school, graduated, and he said the next job opening is mine, but there wasn't anything open. So he said, there is an opening in this small town in Kansas, Parsons, Kansas. I took the job there and met my wife, Debbie, there. And I only stayed less than a year. Got a job offer in Miami, Florida. Went down there for 2 years, where I covered things like the Dolphins and Miami University sports, things like that. And then I got a call from St. Louis, and a friend of mine said, you want to come up here and work? And I said, no, I don't want to keep skipping from newspaper to newspaper. I don't want that reputation. And he said, how much are you making in Miami? I just got a raise. I'm making $180 a week. This is in 1975. 180 a week. And he said, you'll start here at the Post-Dispatch for $365. I said, oh, things are sounding much better now. And sure enough, I took the job. And that was in 75, and I never looked back.
I was going to say, you mentioned, because I believe you worked at least four big notable, can't get my words out, four notable newspapers. And you were, one of the things was being the chief photographer of the Post-Dispatch. But, I wish you didn't say Miami, because that does kind of spoil one of the pictures that I will be showcasing in the second half of the show. But it's fine. You know what? That makes it, that it's still very interesting. I want to ask you this. When you take the photos, obviously you take it through the lens. But here's my thing. Do you ever are you able to take the time at the same time to see the moment itself through your eyes?
No, I'm so attached to that camera, even now, even today.
Really?
I'm trying to take pictures still every single day, and I see the world through that 35 millimeter eye focus.
Do you remember in this, like I said, you're talking about over 45 years. Do you remember the first camera you used professionally?
That I used professionally. I know my first 35 millimeter was one I bought while I was going to college, and it was a Russian Zenit B. It cost me $50, and it must have weighed 5 pounds. And every time you'd click the shutter, it'd make this clunky sound. And I wish I still had it. Have it on the shelf to look at.
Really?
Yeah, that was the good old days. In fact, I had been shooting at the Post for 20 years when the Post hired a sports photographer, a guy named Chris Lee, who's just a fabulous photographer. And he and I covered a baseball game together. And I said, I'm having a real tough time getting used to this autofocus business. And he looked at me and said, I've never not used autofocus. And I thought, oh man, does that make me feel old? All those years of using cameras that you had to focus by hand, and you had to use a light meter and set your aperture and all that. And here comes a guy that had never not used it. And I said, is this kind of like a video game for you? And he said, yeah, actually it is. And he was very good at that too. Chris Lee was. He left the Post also. But I asked him, I said, well, how many frames a game do you shoot? Because at a baseball game, I try and average, 2 rolls if possible, because we have a 2-roll canister that I shake up the chemistry in to develop the film. So I said, that's 76 frames. How many do you shoot? And he says, I average about 1,500 frames a game. But he also was shooting with 2 cameras, and then he had a foot pedal that were hooked up to all his remote cameras. So he was just constantly shooting the whole game. Something I never got used to.
What is one sport that, and if you did have multiple, that you can obviously say that, but that you found very difficult to shoot as opposed to other sports that you had shot?
I think one of the hardest sports to shoot is soccer, mainly because the field is so big and they're all over the place. And 1 second they're down at the other end and you're using your long lens, and a couple of seconds later they're right in front of you. You got to switch cameras real quick and do a wide.
Are you usually fixated on in one spot, or do you ever move up and down the pitch to get different shots?
It depends on, high school and college soccer. You could move anywhere. Those not so much. And same with like pro football. You could go anywhere. But then when it comes to the NFL, they now, especially the big games, the Super Bowls that I covered, they assigned you 1/4 of the field, meaning from about the 20-yard line to about midway in the end zone. And that's all you can do. And they watch you to make sure that you stay where you're supposed to shoot.
Okay, so now I got to ask, what do you think? I mean, like I said, you've covered so many sports, so many events. Is there a sport that you enjoyed shooting more than others? The one that stands out the most to you?
Hockey. I loved shooting hockey.
Oh, okay. That actually kind of threw me for a loop. I thought you were going to say baseball. Hockey. Okay. Why hockey?
Well, I shot my first game, first Blues game in 1975 or 76, and I had a clue what was going on. I'd never been to a hockey game. I didn't know anything about hockey. And so I'm turning to people and saying, why did they blow the whistle? And what's the blue line mean? And just all that stuff. And so it took me a while to really get the hang of it. And once I got the hang of it and realized what a tremendous and fast sport it was, and what unbelievable athletes these guys are, it just became that much more challenging. And you and your previous guests were talking about 2019. I covered that. At the beginning of my career, I covered all sports for the first 7-8 years because I worked nothing but nights and weekends, union rules, because I was a new guy on the team. And then when we hired Chris Lee in I think it was about 2001, somewhere around there. He covered all the sports, and I would only come on with him when teams would make the playoffs. And occasionally the Blues would get into the first round. Of course, they'd always get knocked out. I'd cover, and other people too would get on and cover World Series events and Big 8 basketball and things like that. So Chris left the Post in 2018. And when he did, I went to the photo editor and said, now that Chris is gone, can I go back to shooting hockey? And he said, sure. And so I was a day shift guy, but he switched me so that every time there was a Blues game, I'd work nights. The team in 2018 was in last place, I believe, and they were doing terrible. I didn't care. I just wanted to be there. I wanted to shoot the games. I enjoyed it too much. It was still too much of a challenge. Right after the first year, when they got Bennington and changed coach and they started winning, and I went back to the editor. I said, they're winning now. Can I keep going? He said, it's your deal. Keep going. And so I did. And Then they got into the playoffs, and nobody seemed to be that much concerned because they occasionally got into the playoffs, but they always got knocked out. Well, they won that first round, and I believe won. And then from the next one was Dallas, and he said start covering all the games, and so I started flying back and forth, covering home and away against Dallas, home and away against San Jose, and then all of the games in both, and was there for that final moment with the Stanley Cup. So by then there were other folks on the staff going, hey, I want in on this too. But they finally had one woman photographer come on with me for the last game. And that was good because we needed somebody on the ice and somebody up above.
That's wonderful. Well, JB, stick around, buddy, because we're going to take a quick little break, and we'll be right back for Roundabout Sports, episode 129. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's the Maestro Jeremy Carper alongside JB Forbes. Stay tuned. We will be right back. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to episode 129 of Roundabout Sports. It is April 16th, 2025, as of the air date of this. I'm the Maestro Jeremy Carper alongside Missouri Photojournalism Hall of Famer, longtime chief photographer, and photojournalism legend, honestly, at this point, the one and only JB Forbes. So, JB, we were talking about your life, your career, and a lot of your favorite sports to shoot, and a lot of. But now I think it's time we take a look at some of those famous moments, or whether they're famous or famous to you. You know, there's a lot of them. Like I said, so much so that I can't put them all on just for one episode. But that makes it more fun. You always want to leave people wanting more, right? So you had mentioned in the first half that, well, I should get this out of the way, folks. Be sure to find Roundabout Sports on Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Pocket Casts, and anywhere else that you stream your podcast. Now that I got that out of the way, I want to say you talked about being a photojournalist down in Miami. Now, Miami, one of them you were for the Dolphins. You did photography for the Dolphins. Yeah, they took part in what is still the longest game played as far as time in NFL history. Now, I have a lot of vintage Sports Illustrated issues in my collection. I've also seen a lot more that I don't have. You're telling me you took this photo?
Yes. And that was actually shot in Kansas City at a Chiefs game while I was still going to college and still working in the lab in Topeka. And my boss at the Topeka Capital Journal was a world-renowned photo editor named Rich Clarkson. And he shot pictures for Sports Illustrated on a regular basis. And I would go out and caddy for him on some events, mostly a couple of football games and then golfing events. But on this particular game, he said, I've already got an assistant for covering this game, but there's a Sports Illustrated photographer coming to town named Herbie Scharfman who needs an assistant. Do you want to assist him? I said, sure, I'd be glad to. And I got paid $25 to go and assist this guy. And so here's this game in Kansas City, and at the end of 4 quarters, it's tied. And I was running up and down the field chasing this guy, and he admitted early on, he says, I'm not a football photographer, but we're short people, so they sent me here. He said, I'm a baseball photographer. So about in the 5th quarter, he kept asking me, he said, and I was loading cameras for him and changing lenses for him and the like. And he said, what's the next play going to be? And I said, well, I'm not an expert, but it's 3rd and long, and I think they're going to pass. And I was right so many times. He finally just handed me a camera and said, here, you shoot too. So I started shooting, and he was shooting. And, we moved away from each other, so we weren't get exactly the same angle. And then the game went on to the 6th quarter when Garo Upremian kicked a field goal to win the longest game. And after that, they changed the rules so that they don't have that overtime like that anymore. And the next week, it came out, and my boss in Topeka said, where exactly were you at the end of the game? I said, I was directly across from the kick. And he says, well, where was the SI photographer? And I said, he ran down to the end zone to shoot it lengthwise. And then he turned the magazine around and said, so whose is this? And I smiled and said, that's my cover. And it was
that took place on Christmas Day, 1971 at Kansas City's Municipal Stadium. Yep. And it lasted, now, and keep in mind, folks, I know there's 4 15-minute quarters in professional football. This game lasted over 80 minutes in real time. And eventually, obviously, like JB said, Miami won 27-24. Now, they eventually lost in the Super Bowl to the Cowboys a couple weeks later, but the very next season, the Dolphins became the first and only team to complete now that they've included the AAFC, I guess I should say the first post-merger perfect season in NFL history. Yes. And in 1972. So that's fascinating to me, because that's the thing. I've read so much about the longest game ever played, just like, the coldest game, the Mud Bowl, the Ice Bowl, all of those games are iconic, because I'll be honest, I'm a sports history nerd, and I'm proud of it. So these things, I love what Willie Lanier, who's a part of that game, even said. He says, if you weren't a part of that game, you do not have the ability to quantify what tired means. So wow. I got a kick out of that.
A footnote to that is that Herbie Scharfman, the official photographer, was paid $500 for that cover, and I still got the $25 for carrying his cameras.
Okay, there you go.
It's funny you should also mention the name Willie Lanier, which most people have forgotten that name and what a great linebacker he was for the Chiefs. And in 2002, when the Rams were in the Super Bowl in New Orleans, I was down there to cover that, and I'm off during the day, and I was down the French Quarter, and I'm walking along, and I look across the street, and here's this older couple walking along, and I took one look, and I knew, and I went running across the street, and he must have thought I was a madman, because I came up to him and said, "Are you Willie Lanier?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And I said, "Can I shake your hand?" Because he was one of my heroes growing up. Such a great player for the Chiefs.
Oh man, that is fantastic. Our next moment in the wonderful career that was shot by good old JB Forbes. All righty, what do we have? I'm also kind of going random. I have them all here, but I want to go random. Now, one thing we didn't talk about, we talked about baseball, we talked about hockey, talked about football, you didn't talk about soccer. You didn't mention anything about boxing.
Well, I got to photograph Ali while I was in Miami. He did an exhibition for some kids at a gym in Miami, and so I took pictures of him there. And then once I got to St. Louis, I had ended up with a long photographic relationship with Leon Spinks because in '76 I was sent to the projects where his mom lived to photograph her while she watched the Olympics. And so I was in the room with her, and he won, and she cheered, and it made for an interesting picture. And then later, when he came back to St. Louis, he started training for his fight with Ali. And actually, he went to upstate New York to a training facility. So I got to go up there and spend a week with Leon while he got ready for his bout with Ali. And then just before getting ready to go to the fight, which was in Las Vegas, the sports editor, the photo editor said to me, "I'm not going to let you go. It's a waste of money. Ali's going to kill him, and it's going to be late at night, and you can't get the film back quick enough, so you can't go." So I watched the fight from a little bar across the street from the Post-Dispatch and watched Leon Spinks become the world champion, and I wasn't there. I was so disappointed. But then later that year, Ali wanted a rematch, and this time the photo editor said, "Yeah, you can go." So I went down to New Orleans. I was guaranteed a ringside position to shoot, but once I got down there, I came up to the PR desk, and they said, "Who are you?" And I told them, and they said, "We don't have a spot for you." And I begged and pleaded, and finally they gave me a spot right on a corner. So I had the pole right away, and I had to move out of the way every time the ring girl came up and showed which round it was. And
Right.
I was lucky to get a picture at all, but I was pleased to get that one. And Ali took back his title.
Man, that is definitely something. Speaking of Leon Spinks,
that I worked with.
Go through this memory with us.
This was from upstate New York, and I'd been there for several days watching Leon train with his brother Michael, and they were running the roads in the snow and training in this gym and working out a lot, and so I got chances to talk with Leon and sort of joke around. But then Leon wanted to go down to Philadelphia at the end of the week, and he said he wanted to go down there because he wanted to see the Liberty Bell, and that may have been just partially true. He had some girlfriend down there in Philadelphia who he really wanted to see. Right. So the guy and I drove down to Philadelphia with him, and I don't remember where we were at this point, but the PR guy said, you ought to have a picture taken with Leon. And I usually was not thrilled to be in the picture, but in this case I said, sure. And so I planted my chin on him, and I've loved it ever since, actually.
Yeah, that I always really did find, ever since I saw this photo, I always got a big kick and enjoyment out of it. Um, you know, and then you got interesting ones like this.
Yeah, that I'd
You
already
got to
done.
explain what's going on here, JB.
I had done some work for the Sporting News. They'd actually, in the late 70s, early 80s, they actually asked me to come to work for them full time, and I said no. I said I was just starting to travel internationally for the Post-Dispatch and getting in on some really interesting international stories. And I said no, I'd rather stick with my job. They said, well, we'll just keep hiring you if it's okay for Super Bowls and World Series. I said, sure, I'd love doing that. So I covered several Super Bowls, World Series for them. I was covering the Cardinals all the time back then, and on a weekend, I finally got a day off, and told my wife, I said, let's go to a game. And so I took my camera and we sat in the stand, and I photographed Pete Rose being tagged out by Ted Simmons. And I thought it was just a great picture, but I knew better than to jump in front of the Post-Dispatch photographer who was assigned to cover the game. And I thought, no, I better not do that. That's not cricket. So I saved it. And after a while, I gave it to the Sporting News, and sure enough, they ran it on the front.
Now, before I go to the next picture, you had said, now you also received awards from both the Pro Football Hall of Fame and Cooperstown, the National Baseball Hall of Fame, for your photography, correct?
Correct. Okay,
and
I kept entering in the Pro Football Hall of Fame contest, and the one year I did win first place. Well, a couple times I won first place, but they were still sending the first place people to Canton, Ohio, during the Hall of Fame game. So they flew me up to Canton with my wife, and we got to watch the game, and they presented me with an award. And it was the same year that the St. Louis football Cardinals, Larry Wilson, was enshrined into the Hall of Fame. So while I was there, I took Larry Wilson. And then a few years later, they started up the Pro Baseball Hall of Fame contest. And it was the very first year, and I lucked out and won a first place that year. So I think I was one of the few at that time to get first place in both those contests.
Yeah, that's amazing. So next up, I got for us. All right, we're gonna do a couple iconic Lou Brock moments. Okay, our first one.
Yes,
I think it kind of goes without saying what the moment is, but this folks is considered one of the most memorable moments in St. Louis Cardinals history, and JB's documented it perfectly.
Well, it was both good and bad because they had sent me to travel with him until he got the record, and he didn't get it at home. And then the team flew out to LA, and there was a series with the Dodgers, and he didn't get a chance to steal a base then. And then they moved down to San Diego, and I was there for that. And I thought for sure this was going to be where he'd set the record. And they put me in the third base box. And before the game started, I went to the Cardinals third base coach and said, would you mind staying out of the way in case he does steal a base at second? And he said, sure. And then I asked the umpire the same thing. I said, no, I know this is not cricket, but would you mind staying out of the way? And he said, sure. The guy I didn't ask was the Padres third baseman. And as Lou started running to second, the third baseman stepped right in my way and blocked the view of him sliding base. And I missed that picture entirely. And this was back in '77. I'd only been at the Post for 2 years. I thought I was going to get fired because I missed that picture. But instead, they the PR people let a few of us run on in the game after they stopped the game and let us run onto the field while they presented Lou with the second base bag. And Lou and I had a pretty good relationship back then. He'd always come down to the end of the dugout and talk to me and knew me by name, which was unusual because most players didn't. And he had an encyclopedic mind about the game of baseball. And he would help me because he'd be standing down there next to me. And if there was a guy on first, he'd say, the pitcher's going to throw to first. And and every single time the pitcher would do it. I said, how do you know that? And he says, I just know. And he'd say, now the base runner is going to steal second. I say, how do you know? He says, I've been at this a long time. And he was correct every single time. And so he helped me out. And I never could figure out what he was seeing and how he knew that was going to happen. But that's why he was the great runner that he was.
Excuse me. I know that I had the pleasure of meeting Lou Brock. Oh gosh, I want to say 2016. He was doing an autograph signing, and I was able to have an autographed baseball of his. I also have an autographed vintage card of his. And between what I experienced meeting him and what you hear and what you've experienced being friends with him and what everybody experienced, he was nothing but a genuinely sweet and caring person. And I will say one of my favorite Lou Brock memories is, I mean, obviously it's something that I wasn't there when it happened, but after he broken that record for the stolen bases, he went on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson with the stolen base, with the base that he had gotten. I always got a kick out of that.
I got to
our second. Ooh, go for it.
I got to spend quite a bit of time with Lou, so I got to go in the locker room with him and watch him as he'd joke around before games, and he was just a real gentleman and all that. But by 2016, about the time that you saw him, 2015, 16, I would see him on opening day when he'd come around in the car and get out and with the red jacket on and all that. And by then he didn't know me anymore, and I could tell that his health was going away. What a great guy! A lot of good memories of that. And I was there for his stolen base record, for his 3,000th hit, and his 10,000th time at bat.
Oh, wow. You know, speaking of Lou Brock moments, I got one more I want to share on here.
That was
now,
after he came back. He came back from from setting the record in San Diego, and they waited, I think, month or two before they had Lou Brock night at Busch Stadium, and Stan the Man presented him with that trophy.
Wow. That is really something. That's a beautiful shot, and with Busch Memorial Stadium and the trophy and everything. And Lou was just an icon of this, and to have that presented to him by another absolute icon of the city and the game, Stan Musial, like it's just the perfect setting. I got a couple more want to share before we wrap up, and before I do, I want to say thank you so much for being on this evening. This has been so much fun. It's to me a history lesson that I could listen to over and over again. And I love the stories between.
Can I do some just
Absolutely.
a second shameless self-promotion? It was easy to
Please do.
dig out these sports pictures because I just gave a talk to the St. Louis Camera Club, in which I did a whole I don't know how long I talked, maybe 45 minutes, just showing them sports pictures, which I think they liked. But it was easy to find those because I'm writing a book. Shameless promotion. Hopefully it's going to be out.
Oh, well,
And
now I
it's
know
all-
next time you're on, we can talk more about the book and everything.
It's includes my years in both all the newspapers I worked at and the different things I covered: news and sports and features and travel. So anyway,
That's wonderful.
so
You know, you know, we were talking about the Blues at the top of the show, and I said to myself, we just have to have a blue, and you talked about how much you loved shooting hockey, so we have to have a photograph from you shooting hockey. I have never been so mesmerized, and yet at the same time so what could have been bummed at the same time. The fact that at one point you had Brett Hull, Wayne Gretzky, and Al McInnes on the same team, and Mike Keenan ruined all of it. That's all I'm gonna say.
it's not often that I think in terms of history. I'm thinking of tomorrow's newspaper, right? I was back then, but in this case of history, and I knew that I had to get down to the end just so I could get these guys back. So I thought it was just going to be an iconic image, and I've loved it and glad I got it.
Yeah, that is definitely something amazing to, and I think it's also really great to showcase this with Wayne Gretzky being back in the news, because I want to say, you know, Wayne Gretzky, when he retired, had or shared 61 records in NHL history. Keep in mind, it is 2025. He retired in 1999. Retired in 1999. I had to make sure. I was like, yeah. He still owns or shares 55 of those records.
Isn't that amazing?
He has more. And look, first off, congratulations to Alexander Ovechkin on surpassing a record that we didn't think could be broken, and that was his all-time goals scored record. But the fact this man has more assists than any player other player has points in total, just mind-blowing. Now I got 2 more photos for you for this evening.
This is I actually have a whole sequence on this, but this was the go crazy, folks. Go crazy as Ozzie hit his one and only left-handed home run, just barely over the right field wall, and to beat the Dodgers. I was so excited during the game. I was worried that my hands were shaking too much, just because I was excited about the moment and the play and hoping that I got it. And yeah, that was quite a year.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Last but not least, now I wanted to think long and hard of what picture I was when I was going through these, which one I was going to do last, which one I was really going to look at. And out of all of them, there's just something about this picture that I'm about to show that tells you know the old saying, a picture tells 1,000 words. This tells me one big story.
Of Mickey Mantle, he came to St. Louis after he retired, and he would do different sort of promotional things for money. And I was asked to photograph him when he came to the Old Famous Bar. And they had advertised that he was going to be there for an autograph session. And he was there just for 1 hour. And I stayed the whole hour. I got there early and met him. Great, big, huge hands. I remember that when he shook hands with me. And he was wearing, you can't see it in the picture, but he was wearing his World Series ring. And just real soft-spoken guy. And it was great fun to hang out there for an hour and watch him do his thing. And he was a true gentleman to mostly women who came up wanting autographs from him.
You know, I think the one thing I attribute most to Mickey Mantle is the quote that he had once said that if I remember correctly, here we go. I had to make sure that I got it right. He goes, he had went to he was an alcoholic, and it's sad, but he was very alcoholic, and a lot of illnesses ran in his family. A lot of his members of his family died young. A lot of men in his family, especially. And he had said, now I remember the quote, "If I knew I'd live this long, I would have taken better care of myself."
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. He seemed to be.
Like, I had to think of the quote. That was kind of dragging. I was like, "What was the quote?" Now I remember it, but yeah. And because he was 63 when he passed, but even then, he didn't think he'd live that long.
Mm-hmm. What an athlete, though, during his time.
What an athlete! Honestly, arguably the greatest switch hitter, and one of the greatest in the game. And speaking of one of the greatest in the game, you are definitely one of the greatest in what you've done and what you still do, even though you're happily enjoying retirement. And now you got a book that you can shamelessly plug whenever you feel like it. So, Dick, I have to ask, when is this book expected to be released?
Oh, that's a good question. I was just meeting with people that are trying to help me to get it published. I've worked on it for quite a while. In fact, I've been advised that I need to cut it down because I wrote it in Google Docs and put all the pictures that I wanted in there in Google Docs, and it came out to over 1,000 pages. I said, no, you can't do that. That's too long. Nobody's going to read that many. It had 900 pictures in it, and they said, you got to cut it down. So I've had people look at it and tell me what to get rid of and get it down to size. And hopefully within next year, I will have that out there somewhere.
Well, I know when it comes out, I look forward to buying it, and I look forward to talking to you again. JB, I want to thank you so much for being on the show with me today. This means
thanks for having me.
So much to me. And I look forward to having you on again and talking to you. So I want to wish you a wonderful night. And most importantly, you take care, okay?
Thank you. You too. Appreciate it.
Thank you. JB Forbes, ladies and gentlemen, here on Roundabout Sports, presented by Interstate 70 Sports Media. And folks, we're going to wrap it up this week here on Roundabout Sports. As always, you can find Roundabout Sports on Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Pocket Cast, and more. Be sure to follow Interstate 70 Sports Media on Facebook, on X, and on the Interstate 70 Sports Media YouTube channel. If you want to advertise with us, whether it be for Roundabout Sports, for I-70, whatever the case may be sure to message us on our socials, and we'll get you in touch with our head of marketing, Jared Shannon. Be sure to check out our other shows associated with us here in our network. Issues with Wrestling with Christopher Miles, the Blues Fan Forum podcast, the official blues podcast of Interstate 70 Sports Media, and the Other Guys Sports podcast as well. Okay, and of course, as always, we put up the NAMI helpline at the end of every show. NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. The line is 1-800-950-NAMI. That is 1-800-950-NAMI. The National Alliance on Mental Illness is the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization dedicated to building better lives for those who struggle with mental illness and their families. And we close the show every week by putting up the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline number. And for that, you dial 988. The line is open 24/7, 365, 366 on leap years. Understand you're never alone in this world. There's always somebody out there who loves you, who cares about you, who wants nothing but the best for you in this world. We all go through different struggles and trials and tribulations on a daily basis. And understand that your feelings, what you go through, is absolutely valid. And don't ever let anybody invalidate them. But that doesn't mean they need to be traveled alone. You were just a phone call, a text message, an email, an appointment away from that potential life-saving moment. And you could be the listening ears and watchful eyes for somebody else who needs that life-saving moment. I want to thank Jacob Steve once again from the Blues Fan Forum podcast. And of course, JB Forbes for joining me this evening. Next week, folks, episode 130 of Roundabout Sports. But until then, I'm the Maestro Jeremy Karp. And remember that life is a book full of empty pages just waiting to be written in. Make your lives worth reading.